G'day, Matthew.
Hey, how you doing?
Good to see you again.
You too?
So we're up to episode 22, and this is where Bart Ehrman is looking at what was said at Jesus' baptism. So where are we? We're at pages, 39 and 40?
Yep, that's what we're looking at today, yep.
Okay.
And the section we're looking at is introducing several examples of other discrepancies that Ehrman wants to allege in the life of Jesus, so kind of giving fairly quick examples. He begins the section saying, we've looked in some detail at a few of the interesting discrepancies among the gospel accounts. I can touch on some others more quickly. And so the one we're looking at today, the first of 5, is what did the voice at Jesus' baptism say? So I'll read from page 39, that section, quite a bit of that section. So it says, what did the voice at Jesus' baptism say? It depends on which account you read. The baptism is not narrated in John, but we do have accounts in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all very similar. And he goes on, in all 3 accounts of Jesus' baptism, when he emerges from the water, the heavens open up, the Spirit descends in the form of a dove, and a voice comes from heaven. But what does the voice say? In Matthew, it says, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." The voice appears to be speaking to the people around Jesus, or possibly to John the Baptist, informing them who Jesus is. In Mark, however, the voice says, "You are my son, in whom I am well pleased." In this case, the voice appears to be speaking directly to Jesus, telling him or confirming to him who he really is. In Luke, we have something different, and he's got this long parentheses bracket section here. He says, this is a bit complicated because different manuscripts of Luke's gospel give the voice different words. I'm taking here the original wording of the verse as found in some older manuscripts of the Bible, even though it's not found in most English translations. And then this one, it says, here the voice says, "You are my son, today I have begotten you," quoting the words of Psalm 2, verse 7. Each account is trying to do something different with the voice. That is to say, the different words mean different things and have different functions. In Matthew, the words identify Jesus to John the Baptist and the crowd. In Mark, to confirm Jesus' identity to him directly. In Luke, they declare that the baptism has made or ratified him as God's special son. But there remains the question, what did the voice actually say? So that's the burden of what we're trying to get at. He's interrogating in this section, Sam. What did the voice actually say in relation to what these gospel witnesses claim?
Okay, so there's a few issues there. So let me bring up the verses here.
Yeah, it's good.
So I'll read out the first 2 to start off with. And behold, a voice from heaven said, "This is my beloved son, with whom I am well pleased." And in Mark, and a voice came from heaven, "You are my beloved son, with you I am well pleased." And so, I mean, just a little side note, but when the voice of the Father comes at Jesus' baptism, he speaks these 2, he really speaks 2 verses. So this is my beloved son, it is from Psalm 2, and then with whom I am well pleased is Isaiah 42, and that's the servant of the Lord in Isaiah. And so it's identifying Jesus as the Messiah from Psalm 2, who's the servant of the Lord. So
it's quoting famous Old Testament phrases that are quite significant.
Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42. So that's what's happening there. Now, Ehrman's contention is that if you look at Mark and Matthew, one starts with, "This is my beloved son," and the other says, "You are my beloved son."
Yeah.
And so he sees this as, a big contradiction, a discrepancy.
Doesn't seem that big initially.
Yeah. I mean, we've got to say there's overwhelming agreement. It's John the Baptist baptizing Jesus in the Jordan River. The voice comes, so that there's overwhelming agreement. Now, we do have, one says this, the other says you. So what do you think about that, Matthew?
Well, as you say, the 2 actually agree in what they're saying, and I think Ehrman kind of says that in his chapter there. And so he's making a lot of very little, at least in this case. We'll get to the other one in a minute. it does strike me, if you had a legal case in court and you had two witnesses and they gave those reports of this event, I think you'd be led to believe, okay, we have two witnesses saying the same thing and we've got a clear idea of what was said. It identified Jesus as the beloved son that the voice, the speaker, is well pleased in. It seems very clear. I don't know what to say, this or you, is really a matter of perspective, isn't it? It's some people watching thought it said this, and Jesus, from his perspective, received it as you. It's maybe there's some paraphrasing going in how the gospel writers have written it down, but they're clearly reporting the same event and the same thing that was said. So I don't see a problem here.
Yeah, and when it's spoken, it is spoken for both groups. So right, it is spoken for John the Baptist and for those around him, and it is spoken for Jesus. And so it's inevitable that if you want to pass that on and you've got a particular focus, you're going to have to use different words in order to capture that. But the actual event was for both groups, and so it needs to be written up if you're speaking, if you're trying to record it for each group in a slightly different way. But, no one's saying that it didn't happen. And as I said, there's overwhelming agreement here. I just thought I'd put up this slide here.
What have we got here? Luke bit, is it?
Not yet. This is from E.P. Sanders.
Oh, great. Yep.
So E.P. Sanders is just he's a great scholar and historian. And he writes, I shall first offer a list of statements about Jesus that meet two standards. They are almost beyond dispute, and they belong to the framework of his life, and especially to his public career, and that he was baptized by John the Baptist. And so this is what he says in his book, on the historical figure of Jesus, that, John John passes on the ministry to Jesus in this event, and he sees that as certain. And again, it's the one voice from heaven speaking to two different groups. And so if you want to reflect that, you're going to have to do something like this.
Yeah.
But, it's not saying he's not the Son of God or anything like that. There's overwhelming agreement.
If we're looking for contradiction, we can't see it.
Yeah. He then moves on to Luke, and he says Luke says something very different. So hang on, I'll go back to I'll leave it here. So what we find in Luke in the Bibles that we would have today is that it says the Holy Spirit descended on him in bodily form like a dove, and a voice came from heaven, you are my beloved son, with you I am well pleased. And that's what we have in Mark, right? So it's word for word what we have in Mark. But what Ehrman says is, but there's a contradiction here, because if you go to some manuscripts, some ancient manuscripts, it reads this. And then I've given you the reading that Ehrman gives. And the Holy Spirit descended on him in bodily form like a dove, and a voice came from heaven, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And so it's the same first part of the verse, which is Psalm 2, which they all have. They all have Psalm 2. But this one continues with Psalm 2, whereas Matthew and Mark go to Isaiah 42. And so he's saying, well, you see, what did the voice say? So
and it's not an accident. It's not a random variation. It makes sense why somebody would do this. If you're a copyist and you know the Old Testament well, and you hear "You are my son," which is an important phrase from Psalm 2, you go, "Today I know how this verse goes. I'll just keep copying that." So it's understandable how somebody would do that. But both texts are referring to the same Old Testament background. It's just the Luke variant that he's citing here doesn't have the Isaiah bit. With you I'm well pleased. It is striking, isn't it, Sam, that he has to go to a minority text to make his point and to try and maximize the difference between the alleged difference between Matthew and Mark and Luke, on the other hand.
And you're absolutely right. And I think we're not trying to say that you don't need to do textual criticism on the New Testament. We're saying, no, you need to weigh up the variant readings. But when you weigh up the variant readings, firstly, with this one, the majority reading is identical to what we have in Mark. Okay, so it agrees. There is no contradiction. And then the reading that he chooses, as you said, it's a reading that we can explain as to how this copying error was made. And so this is, if you read Bruce Metzger and Bart Ehrman's book on textual criticism, this type of error is the error of memory. And that is where you remember something, as you said, from something else. So a lot of people have memorized Psalm 2. And so as they start to quote Psalm 2 here in Luke, they finish off the verse. And so we can actually explain how this copying error came about and why it's different to Matthew and Mark.
This error in some old texts, which and most scholars, it seems to not be a contentious example to say that scholars just think the first one that you've got on the screen there is what was original, not the second one that Ehrman highlights here. Yeah.
And I've got a commentary here, and this is discussed, right? Yeah. So he talks in the commentary. I'll put it up there. It's under the orange tag. He says a few manuscripts, D, then lowercase a and b, and patristic citations representing the Western texts have instead of the Psalm 2 and Isaiah 42, they just have the Psalm 2, which is what we see there. And so he spells that out. So, it's all discussed in our commentaries. But again, it's a copying error that we can see why it happened. It's a minority reading. So the question is, why does Bart Ehrman have to bring this up to make his point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, even it's in a chapter called A World of Contradictions.
Yeah.
So even if I bought his variant reading as what was originally written down in Luke, I'd still say this is a massive contradiction. Like it still identifies the same person. It quotes the same bit of the Old Testament. It's missing part of the quote and extends it the wrong way in one of them. But we're still describing clearly the same thing with the same meaning.
Yeah.
It's difficult to make too much of this. Example, I think.
And so look, the main thing is that John the Baptist was the prophet who prepared the way for Jesus. And when he baptized Jesus, there was that confirmation from God where the Spirit of God came down and the voice of the Father said, "You are my son, with whom I am well pleased." And then Jesus began, that aspect of his public ministry. And so that's certain, that's historically certain. And he's really trying to make nothing out of this. So look, we'll finish up there for today. And next week, we will be looking at the next point he brings up on page 40, which is, where was Jesus the day after he was baptized? Mm-hmm. So we'll have a look at that. We'll see you then. So if you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel and join us as we continue to read Bart Ehrman's book and check to see if what he says is true. We'll see you then.